So I was talking about the great man who wrote this book, Vyasa. Sometimes he is known as Badarayana Vyasa, and his father was a great ascetic. His name is Parashara, a great sage. And sometimes he is known as Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, Badarayana Vyasa. His most profound work was this editing of the Vedas into 4 sections: Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda. And he get the responsibility of teaching and continuing this lineage of each of these 4 Vedas to 4 of his disciples. For example, Jaimini was his disciple who took up Samaveda. Vaishambhayana took up Yajurveda, and then there were other great Vedic scholars who were given the responsibility of continuing the Vedic lineage, each of the 4 Vedas. And he is also the author of Brahma Sutras, Vedanta Sutras, which is a very important book in Vedantic philosophical spiritual lineage. And another very important work that Vyasa wrote, we discussed in our Yoga Sutra classes. You know, we have around nearly 200 Yoga Sutra classes in the YouTube, and we have discussed elaborately here Vyasa's commentary on Yoga Sutras. So he was a great genius, and he's also author of the 18 mythological books called Puranas, and 18 secondary Puranas called Upapuranas. So he's an extremely learned philosopher, saint, and author. And there is a very interesting description of Vyasa's personality in the Mahabharata. And that is very interesting. He was a short person who concealed his greatness behind a very unpleasant physical personality. So it said, Virupo hi jadi chapi durvarna purusha krishaka sugandhe daragantascha sarvatha duspradharshanaka tasya krishnasya kapilam jadam deepte cha lochane brabhruni chaiva masruni. So I can give you an example. What kind of person this author was? A very unremarkable personality, externally, I mean from a physical perspective. He was not good looking, and he had long beard and a long matted hair, and he was not fair skinned. He was short in stature, and Sugandhedara Gandhascha, the very unpleasant odor emanating from his body. That's a literal meaning of this statement. Tasya Krishnasya Kapilam, and he was not good looking. So you find a very interesting description of this great man's physical appearance. Deepte Chalochani, and he had very brilliant, penetrating eyes. It's a very interesting description you find. Maybe according to the commentator, according to the 11th commentator, this description was given to show to the world that a man who was not at all remarkable to look at was the most remarkable personality in terms of his accomplishments. The books that he wrote, the great disciples whom he trained, and also the philosophical contributions that he made to human civilization. There's a very, very interesting description. Now, I would say a few things about Vyasa discusses in the Mahabharata. He also talks about the impact of human destiny, karma, what we do in our life will have an impact on human civilization, not only in our life, but also in human civilization. And there is a very, very profound and well-known verse in the Mahabharata. Yatha mataram vatsa sagasreshu api vatsakakha avindat gacchati tatha karmano apragarida phalam It is a very profound statement if you understand the meaning. It talks about the karma, destiny, and the march of human civilization, and how our actions have their impact on our own life. So, what it says is, suppose you have 1,000 cows assembled somewhere, and there's a calf. The calf will find out and recognize its mother from the huge herd of cows, cattle. A calf will never make a mistake. It will directly move towards its own mother. Though all the 1,000 cows or thousands of cows may look alike in appearance, same color, same shape, still the calf will not fail to recognize its own mother. It moves directly towards its own mother, making no mistake. That's why, like that, whatever we do, our karma, our actions, whatever we do, will leave a consequence, will have an impact, and whatever we do, when we are born again, that karma we will recognize, and you find we will show the influence, the imprint of whatever we have done in this life. When we are born again in the next life, whatever we do in this life, its imprint, its influence can be easily recognized. So it shows the connection between human action and human destiny. Now this is true not only for individuals, even for civilizations, even for cultures, it is common. That's what Vyasa says in the Mahabharata. So whatever we do, we should be very careful. We may think, we may like to do certain things because it's very enjoyable to do that, and then we may forget about it, and we may not remember that we may have to come back and enjoy or suffer the consequences of what we do. But Vyasa says, just as a calf never misses its own mother, it directly goes and recognizes its mother from a huge group of cattle. Like that, when we are born again, our own karma will recognize us and it will follow us. And we have to, so we should be very careful with what we should do, with what we are doing in this life. It's a very, very important statement that you find in Vyasa. In this context, Vyasa makes some powerful observations about the importance of statecraft, about the importance of ruling a country, a society, running an organization, running an institution according to the principles of morality and ethics. So he emphasizes this point, because everything in society, in national life, everything depends upon the way morality and ethics or moral and ethical principles are implemented in society or a nation. That's why Sarve Dharma Rajadharma Pradhana, Sarve Varna Palimana Bhavanti, Sarvastyago Rajadharmeshu Rajan, Tyagam Dharmam Chaku Agryam Puranam. What says? So all actions, all activities, justice, stability, law and order, all these, in fact, the stability of political institutions, social values, all of them can be preserved only if there is a proper rule. Rajadharma is mentioned here, you have to remember. Vyasa wrote this apparently around 3500 BC. So that was a time of monarchies. So he says a king or ruler should be very careful to pursue the path of dharma, because everything in society, sarve varna palimana bhavanti sarvastyago. So all groups of people, all activities depend upon and are preserved by Rajadharma, by the way an administrator or a ruler is trying to implement the principles of ethics and morality. Sarve dharma, Rajadharma Prathana. Rajadharma means the morality and ethics followed by a king or an administrator, or maybe an institution that is responsible for running a country or society or institution. That's why Sarve Varna Palimana Bhavandi Sarvastyago Rajadharmesh Rajan. All activities of renunciation, all ethical moral activities can be preserved are possible only if there is proper stability, law and order in society, which again is the responsibility of a king or an administrator. Very profound statement. He says civilizations can continue and remain stable only if they follow the principles of Dharma. I want to tell you later, Mahabharata contains some of the most profound ideas of statecraft. Bhishma's advice to Yudhishthira, his advice to many others you find, some wonderful statements on statecraft. For example, he says, a king is a king only when he looks upon his entire kingdom, the people, his subjects, as his own children. There are such statements you find in Mahabharata. Majje tri dandanido khatayam. What it means? Dandanidhi means law enforcement. The law and order prevailing in society. When that is gone, that is defeated, dandanido khatayam. When law and order are not properly enforced, when dharma is not emphasized in running a country or society, what happens? Majje tri. Tri means three Vedas. That is Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda. Atharva Veda is not taken, not considered to be of the same status. So, all the great ideas, ways of life, ethical moral principles and teachings found in Vedic literature will be drowned as a meaning. When law enforcement, when statecraft fails to enforce dharma. Sarve dharma prakshayehu vibuddhaha sarve dharma shasramanam khataksyu kshatre tyakte rajadharme purane. So when the responsibility of justice, when that's forgotten by the ruling hierarchy, what happens is all dharmas will perish, all ethics and morality will be completely degraded and will disappear. That's why he says, all renunciation, sarve tyaga rajadharmeshu drishtaha, sarva diksha rajadharmeshu uktaha, sarva vidya rajadharmeshu yuktaha, sarve loka rajadharme pravishtaha. It's a very long discussion. Remember, Mahabharata is more than 100,000 verses. And there is a very long discussion on statecraft, on national ethics, national morality, so equilibrium in society, all these are discussed. But one important point that Vyasa repeats and emphasizes again and again is that dharma should be the guiding principle for statecraft and for administration, for running a country or an institution or an organization. It's found in the Shanti Parva. Shanti Parva is very famous, very remarkable for the long discussions by Bhishma. Bhishma is advising Yudhishthira and others, and many others, on how to run a country, how to practice dharma in our individual life. In our individual life, if we don't follow dharma, and then if we do things contrary to the principles of dharma, what happens is our actions will not disappear. It may disappear for some time, but in this life or in next life, our actions will follow us in the form of tendencies and samskaras. And as I mentioned, the calf never fails to recognize its own mother. Similarly, our actions will always recognize us. Even when we are born again, our actions will be waiting for us to enjoy or suffer. Therefore, we should be very careful whenever we do things in social context or national context. That is the importance of dharma. Now we are coming to subject again. Vyasa at some point you find Vyasa was a bit disappointed towards the end of the Mahabharata. Vyasa is the great forefather. He is the grandsire, he is the great ancestor of both Pandavas and Kauravas. It's an important point. Vyasa is the great ancestor of both the Kauravas and Pandavas, the two ruling factions of the same dynasty. And that Vyasa was not very happy to the end of his life, because he found that he preached and he practiced Dharma, but he found that there is something in human destiny, in human psyche, that refuses to follow Dharma, in spite of the fact that Dharma will ensure everything that you want in your life. Dharma will ensure that you will enjoy all that you want in life if you follow Dharma. But still there is a tendency, there is what Dostoevsky called a liking for the unpleasant, a hidden obsessive tendency to do the wrong thing that is present in all human psyche, which according to St. Augustine is a spark of the inherited sinfulness coming all the way from Adam and Eve, according to the traditional theological interpretation. Something like that Vyasa also refers to. The inherent tendency to do the wrong thing in spite of the obvious fact that negative action will produce negative results. We all know intellectually, we know very well, everyone knows, but still there is a tendency in every human being to do the wrong thing. That's what Vyasa says, Urdha bahul viramesha naja kaschik shrunoti me. I cry with my uplifted hands, arms, but nobody is listening to me. Urdha bahu means he is crying, he is lamenting, he is shouting to himself, complaining to himself, but nobody is listening to me. He says, because if you follow the path of Dharma, you will enjoy everything, you will get everything that you want. So Artha and Kama and even Moksha will be inevitable, the inevitable results if you follow the path of Dharma. Still there is a tendency among people and also in civilizations, in cultures, to do the wrong thing and not to follow the path of Dharma and to do something that is contrary to Dharma. So in the Mahabharata, there are many interesting, both in Mahabharata and Ramayana, you can see. See, he says, according to Vyasa, Dharma, as depicted in his work, as essentially two dimensions. One is, it is universal, transcendental dimension. Then it is situational or contextual. So we may uphold a Dharma as a great idea, but a certain situation or a set of circumstances may demand that we do something which is apparently not in tune with our universal principle of Dharma. So there is an apparent contradiction or difference or distinction between the universal application of Dharma as a cosmic preserving principle and a situational or contextual application of the same Dharma in our own individual life. So this creates conflicts. So even in the Mahabharata and Ramayana, you can see in the Ramayana Sita's sufferings, or in the Mahabharata you find, for example, the conflicts that Pandavas faced, the paradox that in spite of following the path of Dharma, Pandavas were always at the receiving end of all difficulties and problems. And in spite of following the path of Adharma or unethical practices, the Kauravas were always enjoying a lot of empirical worldly comforts. This paradox you find in Mahabharata. And they discuss this. Actually, it's something that happens in human life. Sometimes we find, why is it that a good person suffers and a bad person has a good time? This is a common experience that we find. If you look at the surface, there is no real answer. There is no way to find a proper answer to this question. So we have to think of life and dharma in its more universal dimension. Life is not one opportunity. Somebody who enjoys a lot of good things in this life in spite of doing unethical things, he is heading for a greater catastrophe in his next life. And another person who has not done anything wrong in this life always suffers, has some difficulties all the time. So the answer is, he had done a lot of great things in his previous life. That's why he is born as a good person in this life. But he also did something wrong, some unpleasant duties. So he is working out his negative karmas from his previous life. These are different interpretations. So you find there are certain contexts and situations where dharma should be understood in terms of the individual context and situations. And at the same time, there is also universal dimension of dharma. What is the dharma? The car will always recognize its mother. So this applies, according to Vyasa, not only to individual life but also to civilizations and cultures. That's why in the Kaurava, in the battle of Mahabharata, only 18 people survived. And according to many of the traditional sources, which again there is no way to verify, there is no doubt that such a thing as Mahabharata war did take place on that spot, on that area called Kurukshetra, about 80 kilometers away from Delhi, today's India's capital. There is no doubt there are many proofs, many excavated areas which have proved that. But we don't know. But according to traditional sources, they say some 4 million soldiers died. That's the traditional source. That there is no way to verify. We need not pay much attention to that. Maybe it's much smaller number. But there is no doubt that only 18 people survived the Mahabharata war, including the 5 brothers of Pandavas. So that episode, in a way, teaches many universal lessons. So I shall try to elaborate some of these important lessons that we can learn from Mahabharata. One is, I shall narrate a context, an important episode from Mahabharata, which is self-explanatory. As I mentioned, 18 people survived the Mahabharata war. And one of the 18 was Gandhari, the mother of the 100 Kaurava brothers, who did all sorts of terrible things, and their leader, that is Duryodhana, the senior most member of the Kaurava hierarchy. And his mother's name was Gandhari. She was an exceptionally great person, one of the greatest embodiments of what we may call motherly virtues that you can think of in any classical literature, Gandhari. Her husband, Dhritarashtra, was born blind. And so she didn't want to enjoy the gifts of nature, the ability to see. So she always remained blindfolded. She never used her eyesight. She always kept it blindfolded. So there is an interesting scene to the end. After the Mahabharata war, Gandhari was sitting. She was blindfolded, and her husband, Dhritarashtra, also could not see. And then there was a scene when the Pandavas were coming to pay their respects to Gandhari. She was the senior most member senior-most queen of the royal dynasty. And then the 5 Pandava brothers, that is Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula and Sahadeva, they were coming accompanied by Lord Krishna. So meanwhile I should say a few things. Mahabharata war was a great interesting lesson, and it's like a book on statecraft and military strategy. There were many situations where Lord Krishna had to interfere to make sure that the evil forces represented by the Kauravas did not win the war. So Krishna had to interfere, not militarily. He did not directly fight a battle except when he was prompted by Bhishma. Otherwise, Lord Krishna remained a spectator, but giving advice, instructions to Pandavas whenever there was a need to make sure that the Pandavas will win the war, because they represented Dharma. So Gandhari knew that the Kauravas were defeated because of Lord Krishna's wisdom and his instruction and guidance to Pandavas. That's why Kauravas, her own children, were killed and defeated. So Krishna is coming accompanied by Pandavas. So then Gandhari revolted. She exploded in the presence of Krishna. You are responsible for killing all my children. She was fully justified as a mother to become terribly angry. And Krishna said with a smile, you are fully justified in being angry with me. But did you ever open your eyes and look at your own children with a look of compassion? You always remained blindfolded. Did you ever make an effort to guide your own children in their own activities? Your role as a mother was not just to follow, just not to share the burden, the problem, the misfortune of your husband. Your husband was born blind, so she voluntarily became practically blind because she kept her eyes closed and blindfolded. But you also had a duty to open your eyes and watch and guide your own children. You did not do that. See the result. Your own children brought this great downfall on themselves and all of you. So you forgot to do your duty. What's your duty as mother? That's why the Sanskrit statement shows you never looked at your own children with compassionate eyes. You kept your own eyes closed. Krishna's answer. See the result. Immediately Gandhari confessed, yes, this is my mistake. There are just profound scenes which are so universal, so touching and moving. Gandhari, think of that lady, noble lady. She was Pativrata, means she was the embodiment of chastity. That's why to share the misery of her own blind husband, she herself acted as a blind woman, closing her eyes, blindfolded eyes all the time. But Krishna says, that's true, that's great. Sahadharmini means every husband and wife, they 50% they follow the same dharma, same obligations, same duties, same responsibilities. But you forgot and you neglected one thing. You never opened your eyes and watched how your own children were growing, how they were conducting. You never corrected them. And not only that, the literal translation, you never opened your eyes and looked at your own children with eyes of compassion. That is what Krishna told. Immediately Gandhari understood that it was her fault that Duryodhana and other brothers, other children of hers, did not practice dharma. They deviated from the path of dharma. So you can find such wonderful, absolutely moving scenes, and where Krishna's wisdom shines. Krishna was actually responsible for the victory of the Pandavas, because even among the Kauravas there were 3 great warriors who would have wiped out the entire Pandava army. Drona, the great teacher, and Bhishma, the great warrior, and teacher and philosopher, and Karna, who was superior to all the Pandavas. But then they failed because they did not have the guidance, the assistance of Krishna, who embodied Dharma. And when Krishna explained this to Gandhari, immediately she confessed, yes, it's a mother's duty to open her eyes and watch how her own children were growing up. These are very, very wonderful scenes in the Mahabharata. Now, I can also take up a few more interesting episodes in the Mahabharata. One of the most well-known episodes is known as Yaksha Prashna. Yaksha means a kind of celestial being, a disembodied being, can also become embodied. So we may call it maybe something like the angels that you find in Christian theological tradition. You find angels living in the heavens, some celestial beings, yakshas. Yaksha, he puts 125 questions to the Yudhishthira. And Yudhishthira's answer, something like a riddle like set of interrogations, interrogating questions, the Yaksha puts to Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira's response replies to these questions. Altogether, you can find in the standard Mahabharata book, it's mentioned 125 questions, but in some books called 126 questions. It comes in the Vana Parva, called Aranyaka Parva. The incident, the episode takes place in thick forest. Okay, now before that, I had to explain a little bit about this Pandavas' history. Pandavas are the 5 heroic brothers, as you know, just to keep in mind. Yudhishthira, the eldest, Bhima, and Arjuna. These 3 elder Pandavas are the children of King Pandu, and their mother was Kunti. So King Pandu had 2 wives. One was Kunti, the mother of Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna. The other wife, the stepmother of Yudhishthira, was Madri. Madra Desha, you find mentioned, it corresponds to today's Sindh and maybe some parts of what is now known as Pakistan, West Punjab, that region called Madra Desha, the Madra country. So, maybe in 3rd millennium BC, the king was Madra, the Madra Desha, the Madra country. And the second junior wife of King Pandu was Madri. She came from that land, Madra Desha. And her children were Nakula and Sahadeva. So there are 5 brothers. They were not children of the same mother, but they were children of the same father. Father had 2 wives, Kunti and Madri. So, Nakula and Sahadeva were the children of Madri. Now, this should be kept in mind when we go to the next important episode. The episode is, as I mentioned, Yaksha Prashna. As I mentioned, it comes in Aranyaka Parva or Vana Parva. The story goes like this. The story is very important, but these questions and answers are very profound. It's all coming from Vyasa. So, one day, these Pandavas were moving in the thick forest. They were excommunicated from their own country. Their kingdom was captured through a trick, through a nasty trick by Duryodhana and others. This is how the story goes, and they were expelled from their own country. They were physically capable of fighting back and taking back their country, but they didn't do that. There was some, what do you call this, gambling. Yudhishthira's addiction to gambling brought him to this great disastrous situation. Anyway, that we'll discuss later. So the Pandavas were moving, wandering the thick forest. If you want any clarification of the story, you can ask me questions after the lecture during Q&A session. So Pandavas are moving about in the thick forest. At that time, a Brahmin came, it was a priest, came and said, look here, I was trying to do the Vedic ritual. So, the aranis are two pieces of stone or sometimes some kind of piece of wood that were used to ignite fire in ancient times to produce fire for the fire sacrifice. Two pieces of arani. So they were taken off by a deer in antlers, When the deer moves about, these pieces of wood got trapped in the deer's antlers and the deer went away. So this priest came to Yudhishthira, Bhima and Arjuna and others, please help me to get back my aranis so that I can continue my ritual. All right, they agreed. So they followed the deer to a thick forest and they moved deeper and deeper in the thick forest. Finally, they found in a place where there was nothing to be seen. And then they felt very thirsty. So one of the Pandavas, that is Nakula, he climbed a tree, very tall tree, and from there he found out there is a lake nearby. So they wanted to go and drink water from the lake. So one of them started moving towards the lake. Nakula is the elder son of Madri, and Sahadeva is the younger one. So Yudhishthira asked Nakula, who reported that there is a lake nearby, a beautiful lake with pure water. He could see that from the tall tree, the top branch of the tree. And Nakula started towards the lake, walking towards the lake, and he reached there. And there he wanted to bring some water. Before that he wanted to drink some water for himself. When he was able to drink this water from the lake, he heard a noise coming. The noise told him, look here, this lake belongs to me. So you should get my permission before you drink water from this lake, or carry water from here for your brothers. So I'm going to ask you some questions. You answer all these questions, then I will permit you, I will give permission to drink water. Nakula, he just ignored this voice. He went ahead and he was to drink water. He died. He fell dead. So again Sakadeva came and all the other Pandavas, Arjuna and Bhima, they followed. All the four brothers, they had the same fate. They approached the lake. They were able to drink water, and when they were able to drink water, a voice told them, look here, you can drink water, but you should answer my questions. I'm going to ask you some questions. If you could successfully answer my questions, you'll be allowed to drink water, not otherwise. They ignored him, the voice, and they went ahead, tried to drink water, they fell dead. At the last moment, Yudhishthira decided to go there because he found that all the four brothers have not returned, they have disappeared. And when he reached the lake, he found they were all lying there, apparently dead. So he was mystified. And he also tried to drink some water. At that time there was a crane standing there. And he heard a voice apparently from the crane, who was the celestial being who had taken the form of a crane. And he said, look here, all your four brothers, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, Sahadeva, the four brothers, they're all dead because they refused my warning. I told them if they wanted to drink water, they should answer my questions. And they ignored me and now you can see their fate. Yudhishthira was a very wise person. Bhima was more a man of action, a firebrand warrior, more known for brawn and brain. So he didn't bother. Arjuna was a very self-confident, very proud of his power and his skill as a warrior. So also he did not have wisdom. He was not wise enough to wait and find out why the mystery behind this voice coming, warning him not to drink water before answering the questions. Nagula and Sakadeva, they were young boys. They were twins. So Yudhishthira, on the other hand, very, very wise man, as we are going to find out. He was a great philosopher, learned man, a wise man. So he knew there's some mystery behind. Why all these four brothers who are warriors, who were great men capable of taking care of themselves, they are all lying dead. There should be some mystery behind. So Yudhishthira told the crane, the yaksha, the celestial being, all right, you can answer, you can start your questions, I shall try to answer. This is an interesting episode known as Yaksha Prashna. Prashna means questions, 125 or 126 questions asked by Yaksha, a divine being. Okay, now, among these questions, there were some very profound questions. To give an example, the Yaksha is asking questions, what is Dharma? What is the highest accomplishment for a person, for a human being? Who is an ideal king? Who is an ideal teacher? All these questions are asked, and Yudhishthira answers these questions. Now, one question is, to give an example, what's the greatest wonder and mystery in the world? The question is, Ahanyahanni bhudani gachantiha yamalayam seshaka sthavaramichandi kim ascharyam atah param. Ascharyam means mystery, the great wonder. The question was, what is the greatest wonder, the most indescribable, the most mysterious truth? It cannot happen, but it is happening. So what is that? The answer given by Yudhishthira is this. He says, Ahanyahanni bhudani gachanti iha yamalayam. Iha bhudani ahanyahani. Every day in this world, all living beings are disappearing, going to the abode of death. You can find every day, maybe every minute, different living beings, human beings, animals, insects, everything. All these are dying every minute. It happens. But those who are watching this happening, they think that they are different. They are not going to meet the same fate. This is the greatest mystery. Something that is happening in front of us, and we know for sure that death is certain. But within us, there is a feeling, well, we know, we don't make that statement because we'll be laughed at, because everyone knows that everybody is bound to die one day. But in all human beings, there is this hidden, unspoken feeling, well, I'm going to remain here all the time. My money in the bank, my health, my youth, all these are going to remain there. Now, this is not well expressed, but this at the subconscious level, we have this feeling that we are exceptional, we are different from them. This is the greatest wonder. Just I'm giving some samples of these questions and answers. Another question. That question is this: what's a way out to follow Dharma? Now, Dharma is very difficult to understand. As I mentioned now, there is a universal dimension of Dharma. Then there are situational or contextual dimensions of Dharma. What is Dharma from a philosophical, transcendental perspective? may be slightly different from its application in individual context in our life and also in the life of a nation or society or civilization. So how to really understand the way to practice Dharma? You can write books on Dharma, the history of Hindu Dharma Shastra. 8 volumes written by a great man, a great Mahamodaya Kale. He's a great, outstanding scholar who has written this famous book, The History of Hindu Dharma Shastras. I think Bobby Coleman, I showed you the 8 huge volumes. And he has written this in my library, and here the 8 huge volumes, each much bigger than Encyclopedia Britannica. So we can write books on Dharma. We can write maybe thousands of books. What exactly the implication of Dharma, the word Dharma, in our real life when we are facing a problem, we are facing a conflict situation? What is the Dharma that we have to follow? Very difficult to decide. So, Yudhishthira understood this. So, Yudhishthira's answer is, Tarko apradishta sutayo vibhinnaha naiko rishayescha madam pramanam dharmasi tattvam nikhitam guhayam mahajano yena gada sapantha. What's the way? Pantha means marga. What's the way? That is the question. How to really understand? What's the method to understand what is my Dharma in one context or in another context, changing context and situations? What's the actual implication of Dharma and how to follow? You read all the books, you may not be able to fully understand what Dharma means in a particular situation, our own life. So, Yudhishthira says, logic, you can use your own logical power, your own dialectical power, your own analytical power, but that will not help you to understand what Dharma implies in the particular specific context of your life. There are a number of books, Tarka Apradishta, it is inconclusive, and Sudayo Vibhanna, there are any number of books talking about Dharma, so many books. Naiko Rishayascha Madam Pramanam. There is not a single great saint whose views are equally applicable in all situations. There are any number of saints in India who wrote about Dharma, but nobody whose interpretation of Dharma is actually applicable in every single situation in our life. Maybe in individual life, in the life of an householder, the life of an administrator, the life of a student, the life of a teacher. There are great teachers who have written about this, but there is not a single teacher whose teachings are equally applicable in all situations. Yudhishthira says, Dharmasi tattvam nikhitam guhayam. So the actual implication of Dharma remains hidden. So the only way out is Mahajano yena gada sapantha. How great men acted in different situations. That's the only way to understand the actual implication of Dharma. I gave the example yesterday, the example of Lincoln, who fought a war, but he was perhaps the least warlike person America ever produced. So Lincoln was perhaps the least warlike person, the most peace-loving person that the country produced. Where do we wage a war? You can imagine. So, somebody who can fight the evil without hating the evildoer. So, one example of Gandhi, or there are Buddha, Lord Krishna, Shankaracharya, Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna. All these are great teachers of Christ, or any teachers, great men. Buddha, of course, a great example. So, if you follow and you study their life and teachings and just find out how they actually applied the principle of Dharma in different life situations, if you try to understand, that's the only way to get a clue as to what Dharma actually implies in real life. The Mahajano yena gada sapantha. The path followed by great idealistic men, men of great ideals. That's the only way to understand the actual implication of dharma. This is the answer given by Yudhishthira. So you can imagine the profoundness, the deep contemplative wisdom behind each of these words. Now, I would like to give some examples from Yaksha Prasna, and then we will go to other episodes in Mahabharata. So the end of this book, maybe I think the 100th question, Yaksha, in the story, sometimes the crane, who was the celestial being standing there incognito, asked this question, Vyakhyada me toya prasna yadhadatyam parantava purusham tu idanim vyakyahi yascha sarvadhani naraha. So before that, Yaksha asked the question, who is the richest man in the world? And Yudhishthira said, the richest man is somebody who has acquired the most precious wealth. That's not the wealth, no bank balance. What is the richest wealth of a person? So if you want to be called a rich man, you should have something that is long-lasting. If you've got gold, you'll be called a rich man because gold can last for long, bank balance, everything. So you're called a rich person only when you have something that is lasting. So, and what is the most everlasting, long-lasting wealth you can acquire? Your own good actions and the research. What you call punya in Sanskrit language. So the highest and most precious wealth we can have is the storehouse of our own good actions. Because when we do good things, when we do things of compassion, kindness and magnanimity and generosity, those actions produce a kind of invisible, precious wealth. And nobody can take it away from you. A thief may be able to break into your home and take away your wallet. But no thief can ever break into your own life and take away the stock of your own good actions, because these actions will remain there when you are born again next life. These actions constitute the bank balance, and from that bank balance you can use the wealth, your own inherited wealth you can use for your own prosperity. So that we'll discuss in the next session, the 100th question and answer, and the 101, 102, like that. Altogether there are 125 questions in some of these standardized versions. So you can ask interaction, we can have interaction now. Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
I have a question about Vyasa.
Yeah.
The famous story about his despondency, his frustrations, leading to the composition of the
Bhagavata.
Purana. There's a couple of things that I want to know. One is, we have these stories as hagiography, as embellishment, but they always have a great symbolism. And I love the story because it humanizes this great author so deeply.
Yeah.
Do we know any more about it? And can you comment on your feelings about it?
Yeah. So the story you referred to occurs in the Bhagavata Purana, which is his great masterpiece on devotional philosophy. 18,000 verses divided into 12 sections, 335 chapters. This is the size of Bhagavata Purana. The most profound, important work in Hindu Vedantic tradition on devotion. So the story goes like this. After writing this Mahabharata, after dividing the four Vedas and teaching all these to his innumerable disciples, and after writing Vyasa Smriti and so on, Vyasa felt a great inherent vacuum, an inner pain, a kind of inner incompleteness, lack of fulfillment. well, I feel I didn't do anything. He didn't feel he knew the contentment that comes to you. Now, what is contentment? Contentment is a kind of inner feeling of fulfillment. When you have that feeling, you don't look for anything more, anything else. You feel kind of self-contentment. You may be, a man may be a very poor person, but you can see this in the lives of great musicians, artists, painters, with a strong devotional, spiritual orientation. Apparently, they were not rich or popular. They did not get much recognition. There were many great such examples, musicians, painters, authors, poets, did great things. But they were recognized only maybe after several hundreds of years later. Like Eckhart is an example. Eckhart, of course, did not live. Eckhart, 13th century German Christian theologian, philosopher. The point is, when you get that feeling, then you are totally free from any kind of despondency. You get the feeling, I don't have to look for anything else or anything more to achieve. Vyasa did not have that, even after writing Mahabharata. So Narada, another sage, came and asked him, what's the matter with you? So Vyasa said, well, I don't feel any inner satisfaction. Then Narada told him, well, you wrote Mahabharata and you wrote about Dharma. Dharma is neutral. Dharma, in its profound spiritual sense, is the highest universal ethics and morality. But the problem is that could be interpreted by a villain in his own way. That could be interpreted by a great philosopher, a Christ or a Buddha in his own way. Hitler has his own justification for the horrifying, horrible things he did. Duryodhana had his own justification for all the terrible things he did in Mahabharata. So it is inconclusive. It doesn't tell you what you should do. It presents before you something. You can study and think for yourself. So it doesn't lead you to a conclusion. It is morally and spiritually, ethically inconclusive. So Vyasa did not feel that he gave anything worthwhile to humanity, in spite of writing all this. So Narada told him, all right, don't worry. Now you write something about what a spiritual seeker should do to achieve fulfillment in his own life. So when you write about something, you write a book on how to reach fulfillment in spiritual life, then you yourself will get that fulfillment. And Vyasa wrote Bhagavata Purana. Satyam Param Dhimahi, it was the conclusion of the 12th skandha, Vyasa writes. He said that is the ultimate spiritual truth. I am meditating upon him. When he finished that, he himself became fully contented. So you can see even such a great, outstanding genius is capable of having this despondency. That makes him all the more greater than otherwise. Otherwise, Vyasa would have become a granite stone without any emotion and feeling. See, Vyasa is so accessible and approachable because you can find Vyasa standing before you as a very sensitive human being with some of the weaknesses that all human beings have. And finally, he transcended that stage and he became immortal. He wrote Bhagavata Purana with the story of Lord Krishna, how to practice devotion life. That's the theme of the book. Okay, I hope Bobby is okay?
Yes, perfectly clear.
Thank you.
It's an incredibly instructive story.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I want to ask about how instructive the story of Gandhari is.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of this,
yeah.
Not only for proper parenting, guidance, but also just for general moral action.
Yeah, precisely. That's true. See, the two women characters of Mahabharata, Kunti and Gandhari, both are equally great. Surprisingly, Kunti is the mother of the great Yudhishthira, Arjuna and Bhima, who are embodiments of Dharma, Yudhishthira especially. Gandhari, the mother of all these evil fellows, Kauravas, who did all terrible things. But she herself was a great woman. That's something very interesting. Gandhari's character is so spotless, absolutely wonderful, a gem of a feminine character. But Krishna tells her, okay, that is fine. You are the very embodiment of compassion, love, everything. And you are so loyal to your own husband, whose physical disability you wanted to go through by keeping yourself blindfolded. Dhritarashtra was born blind. But you should have opened your eyes and watched how your own children were growing up. In the midst of practicing austerity by remaining blindfolded, along with that you should also have kept your eyes open for some time to make sure that your children were growing up properly, which you did not. And see the results, the consequences. Gandhari was stunned because she was a great woman, so she understood Krishna was right. And she was wrong in not taking care of her children. That's it. So you can see both the greatness of Krishna, the greatness of Gandhari, who had the composure to admit her own, her own deficiency in not taking care of her own children. At the same time, her explosive anger towards somebody who was indirectly responsible for the children's death. So very interesting story. Okay, thank you for the question. Yeah.
Maharaj, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. Maharaj, I have a question for you on Dharma.
Yeah.
So I very clearly understand the subtlety of Dharma and the difficulty to point one's finger on an explanation of what is Dharma.
Yeah.
But at multiple places, you said that the best way to know Dharma is to look at the lives of great personalities. But in Mahabharata, multiple, for example, in the Vidur Parva, or even mentioned by Draupadi, there's many places in Mahabharata where they talk about the word anukrosha. They say that as long as you have anukrosha, some sort of empathy in whatever you're doing, if you have this empathy towards someone else in your action, that's the quickest way that's a way to kind of feel that Dharma is at work and then protect yourself by that, then your action is dharmic. Would you agree with this? Because at multiple parts, this word comes up, right? Would you agree with this? Because I wanted to get your thoughts on that, especially on that word, anukrosha.
Yeah, so that's so, that again, that's why the situational or contextual application of Dharma. The distinction between the universal and the contextual application of Dharma is only apparent, not real. So there are certain situations where we will, if we are a truly sincere follower of the universal Dharma ideal, that is, Dharma is something that sustains, that preserves, that protects and guarantees continuity and stability and ethical moral principle. When we believe that is a transcendental reading of Dharma. When we sincerely believe that, we will develop an instinctive understanding of what the situational application of the Dharma could mean in different situations. See, to cover the story, how could, Gandhari explodes to Krishna, becomes very angry. But when Krishna explains, immediately she understood that. Why? Because she herself was, at the situational context, she became suddenly angry at Krishna. But she also knew the transcendental definition of Dharma. Dharma is something that preserves. So if you apply that principle, there is nothing wrong in what Krishna did. Because Duryodhana and his or her own children were doing terrible things. And they actually had the consequences to enjoy or suffer. So this anukrosha, that instinctive understanding of what Dharma could mean in the individual contexts or situations, that is a natural development of every human being if he sincerely believes in Dharma. It is not a philosophy, it's an instinctive understanding. So that's why I give the example of Lincoln, because I give the example of Lincoln because from Western context I cannot think of anyone other than Lincoln. In Indian context there are many. In Western context, Lincoln comes very close to that Dharma ideal. He himself was the least warlike person, the most non-violent person you can think of, who didn't want to hurt an insect. But he decided to do something which involves apparent himsa, but he was doing it to eradicate a much worse himsa. So you can see the situational application of universal dharma. The situational application of the universal. If you look at the universal all context, is like a granite stone. You may end up being an imbecilic person, imbecilic. You may become a moron if you always uphold the universal. Actually, in Indian history, there are many such incidents I can tell you. One important incident is the Battle of Terrain. The Prithviraj Chauhan, in the first war with I think the Ibrahim Lodi, I'm not sure, the first Muslim invasion of Delhi. And near Delhi there is a place called Terrain, the Battle of Terrain, where the invader, the Afghan invader, came and Prithviraj Chauhan, the Rajput king, he completely defeated him, imprisoned him, this invader, the cruel monster who were killing people and destroying temples. He defeated him, imprisoned him. And then one priest, a Sanskrit Pandit most probably, don't mind me telling you, he said, you should not hurt a defeated enemy. He was quoting from an ancient book. So what Prithviraj Chauhan did, he released him. He came back after 6, 7, 8 months, he came back and at night through stealth he killed people because he came incognito and killed all the people, and he defeated. He did not defeat, but he through stealth, through trickery, he killed the king, and that is how the first Muslim rule started in Delhi. So how do you talk about it? Do you think Krishna would have been so foolhardy like that? No. Krishna would have remained alert against the evil man. He would not have given him another opportunity to come back and destroy you. So the Smriti interpretation sometimes weakens you. So if you reduce Dharma to the universal application, it becomes an ideal that is floating in the air, which is no use for you. It doesn't sustain society. It doesn't preserve society. It doesn't protect society. It leads to downfall of society, as happened the Battle of Terrain, after Battle of Terrain in Indian history. You can look at this. So very often you find this. So with the Anukrosha, that when you apply the universal Dharma ideal in independent and distinct life situations, you should be able to apply it properly. And that may involve apparent deviation from the universal, but it's only apparent, not real. I give the example of Neville Chamberlain and the Treaty of Appeasement, 1938, the Treaty of Munich, good example. Many such examples in Indian history, full of examples, That's why at some point, when Dharma becomes a drawing room discussions topic, it doesn't fulfill any purpose. Becomes self-defeatist. That's an important thing to remember. That's why Vivekananda said, there is only one character, Krishna, who had no cobweb in his brain. Very clear, very clear. Remember. And again, in Mahabharata, Krishna tells something interesting. Sometimes our timidity, cowardice, our own laziness, we may try to hide under the garb of Dharma. And Krishna gives this example in the Gita. Arjuna's lamentation was good one example. It's part of Gita, Mahabharata only. So, Bhaya Renat Ubaradam Mamsindetwa Maharada Yesham Chetam Bahumado Bhutwa Yasisi Lakhavam. So when Arjuna was trying to run away from his duty and responsibility, Krishna said, look here, you have a great name, good reputation, all this will go away. And people will start telling that you are a coward, you are running away from your duty. So at least from the common sense perspective, you should do your duty. So that is why, actually, in real life, when you uphold a higher ideal, that sincere practice of upholding a higher ideal will generate in all of us a kind of instinctive common sense, and that will help you to choose what is right, what is dharma, and practice it. That's why I mentioned reading the 8 volumes of Dr. Kane's philosophy of Hindu Dharma Shastra may not equip you to understand dharma, but you should have a common understanding. I shall do whatever is needed, because that is the most ideal thing to do.
So Maharaj, can I just please add one point? So
Yeah.
based on what you said, so would you agree that the way Bhishma just said in the Sabha, when he said, well, dharma is subtle, he didn't act properly then, because he should have said, well, you cannot disrobe Draupadi. He should have been practical and said, that's not the right thing to do. Instead of just using a high ideal of,
Absolutely. In fact, Bhishma was lying in a bed of arrows. And Krishna, Yudhishthira, all of them go there. Draupadi also is there. Bhishma admits that his own inner vision, understanding of dharma became clouded. He became confused. And Bhishma admits that because he was living in the company of men like men like Duryodhana and Dushasana and others. He was the grandsire, so naturally he was living in the palace of the princess, unlike Pandavas who were living in the forest. So Bhishma did admit to the end of his life that he made a colossal blunder. He admits that. And Bhishma is the greatest teacher. You find the largest number of instructions come from Bhishma in the Mahabharata, Shanti Parva, Bhishma Parva. Huge mass of literature instructions. There he says, without power, a king is useless. Actually, Bhishma says many things which he did not actually practice in the Mahabharata. But remember, he was not a hypocrite. He did admit that he made a blunder and gives an explanation as to why he made a blunder, why he was living in close proximity with people who were practicing adharma, who were not practicing dharma. And because of that close association and dependency on people like Duryodhana, his own understanding and his own perception became clouded and he became confused. Bhishma admits that. That's the greatness of Bhishma. See, Mahabharata is a very complex book. You find a great man like Bhishma, who was otherwise a very perfect human being, making very silly, stupid mistakes that you common people won't make. And that's why the classic is so great. The inner conflicts of a highly refined human being like Bhishma, who were torn between these two, his love and affection for Pandavas and his own affinity to Kauravas, in whose company he was living, which actually caused this inner confusion, moha, as you call it. That gave him a clouded vision of what is dharma, what is adharma. In real life, though he knew in theory, but he could not practice in action. That's why Vivekananda said, but Krishna was totally free from all this stupidity and confusions. So remember this. I'm using a strong language. Bhishma is one of the greatest characters of world literature. But that Bhishma also made some very, very silly mistakes, like keeping quiet when a terrible thing is happening in Kaurava court. In fact, that's why this classic so touching and so astoundingly complex. Actually, many of the highly evolved, highly refined persons will have these subtle conflicts. You see, normal, very worldly minded will have totally no conflict. He will do most terrible things without any problem. You see, a man like Neville Chamberlain, this man was a good man, otherwise he would not become a victim to this trap, He made a colossal blunder of signing the Treaty of Appeasement with Hitler in 1938. He was a very refined aristocrat, but that itself made him slightly imbecilic, like Bhishma.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Pranam Swamiji.
Yeah, namaste.
I wanted to ask for clarification on a term you used when you were speaking about the enforcement of Dharma. You were saying when the Vedas aren't followed, that it's like drowned. And then you used the term, what I heard was statesmanship or stateship, something like that.
Statecraft. Statecraft.
Statescraft.
Yeah. Administration, public administration. The
Is
art
that
of ruling a country,
Oh, ruling a country. It doesn't mean law.
Rajadharma. Raja means kingship. Dharma means this higher ideal. So you can find great teachings on statecraft in Sun Tzu. And teachings are not so very pleasant. You find in Machiavelli. You find in the Prince, the opposite of statecraft minus dharma. You can find the realpolitik in its most in its naked realpolitik. That even Machiavelli you find the opposite of it in the Prince. Yeah, the higher refined statecraft that you find in Mahabharata, where he says a king should be impartial. We will in the Yaksha Prasna it comes. A king should be impartial. So far as king is concerned, when it comes to Rajadharma, statecraft, before him there is no distinction between his own children and society as a king. Only such a person can be an ideal king. Again, you find the wisdom that Plato talks about in Republic, higher wisdom. Yeah. Philosopher king ideal, That's right. Statecraft.
Statescraft.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
got
you,
it.
Mark.
Yeah.
There's a question from YouTube. Please expound on Draupadi's prayer in full surrender to Krishna during her dishonor in the Kaurava court when none of her protectors could come to her assistance.
Yeah. That we'll do later,
Okay.
Yeah. Draupadi's prayer is there, Dibada Sanduna Sashud Yatra Yatra Jagat Guru Bhavado Darshanam Yatsyad Abhina Bhavajanman. So there are a few prayers from Draupadi which are very profound. One of the prayers in the Mahabharata from Draupadi is praying to Krishna. Krishna give me more and more trouble because when I face troubles, I feel the inclination to pray to you, to turn my mind to you. This is so that I will be liberated from the cosmic cycle. So we'll discuss later. So, Draupadi is a very, very important, touching character. Very, very, on the one hand, the helplessness of a woman, a noble woman. On the other hand, the dynamism, the wisdom, and her boldness. She was very bold. She questioned Yudhishthira for many of his actions. And he questioned Bhishma at the last moment when they came to. So he's a character of enormous importance in the Mahabharata. We'll discuss that. Okay? So, okay. Please,
Thank
please.
you, Maharaj. Just a direction on how to approach such a massive text.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think it's just a matter of personal preference on how one approaches it, or is there a traditional way of taking piece by piece? Do you have any recommendations on how to read such a massive text?
Well, there is a commentary called Nilagandiya that is which is very huge. So I would say for a Western student, I would say you can read C. Gopalachari's relatively small but very wonderful book on Mahabharata.
It's an abridged version.
Abridged version. It's not even an abridged version of Mahabharata will be of enormous size. But this book may be around 350 pages, brought out by Bharati Vidya Bhavan. He wrote, he was a great statesman and he was a very great enlightened politician in India who were deeply involved in national freedom struggle. He wrote these two well-known books on Ramayana and Mahabharata. I would always recommend these two books to any Western reader to get an introduction to Mahabharata. That's the best way to approach this enormous work. If you start reading verse by verse, you may get lost, especially if you are not familiar with Sanskrit language. So there are, it's called different sections called parvas, So Shanti Parva, Anishasana Parva, Vana Parva is called Aranya Parva, and so on. So there are many Sabha Parva is very important. So the point is, it's best to start reading Rajagopalachari, see Rajagopalachari's translation. In a way, it is summary, like a storytelling format on Mahabharata. And then, if you want to directly read the text, there may be translations, but I think there are translations in Hindi language and some Indian vernaculars. I don't know if the entire text is translated in English, but if you read the entire text, English translations, it will be literal translations, which may not help you to understand the implications the way I'm explaining.
Exactly. There are complete translations, but they are, as you say, without full explanation.
Yeah. You may, for example, you may read something about dialogue, but the importance of the dialogue and the relevance of the dialogue and in what way it plays an important role in the total context of Mahabharata, that may not be very clear unless you read the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for the response.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the questions. So I will take up certain episodes and then expand and explain in detail some of the great characters, especially women characters of Mahabharata, very profound characters, the highest nobility, the peak of human evolution. So very profound. So we'll take up later gradually. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bobby. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.